Hi, this is Tisch Aitken, and it is May 21st, and we have a lot going on. We are now in Gemini season, and we have another unforgettable week. So to bring you up to speed, the Sun entered the mutable air sign of Gemini yesterday on May 20th, where it'll be through June 20th, and this brings much more of a sociability. The Sun in Gemini is a time for learning and communicating and getting involved in local activities, your local farmers markets and fairs, and just a social energy, good for networking. And the Sun is giving us a preview of the planet Uranus, which is an outer planet and the modern ruler of the sign of Aquarius. Uranus is going to ingress into the sign of Gemini from July 7th through November 6th, and then it's coming back next year on April 25th, and it'll be there through 2033. And this is going to bring much more of a quick pace. It's going to bring a lot of innovation and learning, and I think a lot of excitement, a lot of fun. Uranus has been in Taurus since May 15th of 2018. And the last time I was on here, I was talking about when it first ingressed into Taurus. I remember thinking so much about the climate and the environment, because Taurus, out of all of the signs, is most associated with planet Earth, with Mother Nature. And there was a volcano that day in Hawaii, and this past week the Sun met up with Uranus last week, the final time, and there was a volcano in Hawaii that erupted right before that. And then there was a lot of turbulence. In New York, there was a ship that crashed into the Brooklyn Bridge. That's pretty huge and pretty explosive. There were a lot of explosive things that happened over the weekend. But we are preparing for magic. It may not feel like this. It's the birthing of Pluto in Aquarius, which is chaotic but also exciting and unlimited. And the more we have planets in harmony, this is going to work with this to bring it to another level. And Neptune, which is the dream and the modern ruler of Pisces, entered the sign of Aries on March 30th, where it will be through October 22nd. Then it's dipping back into the sign of Pisces, which it rules, and it'll be there through the end of January of next year, and then it's done. Saturn is entering Aries on May 24th at 11:36 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. So this Saturday, during Memorial Day weekend in the United States, Saturn hasn't been in Aries since April 7th of 1996, and then it left in March 1st of 99. So it's, that's the last time, the mid-late 90s. And now, many of you may remember that time, and some of you may not, but this is a new story. But you add the fact that Neptune, which takes 165 years to transit and has not ever been in Aries in our lifetime, it's in a new story, a new chapter, bringing a new dream. And Neptune has been touring in the sign of Pisces since 2011, working on your spirituality, on your creativity, on vulnerability, on dealing with psychological issues. And right now, since we had the full moon in Scorpio, Saturn has been at the very final degree of the zodiac, which is 29 degrees of Pisces. And this is a very uncomfortable place for Saturn to be. And again, Saturn will be entering the sign of Aries on May 24th, following where Neptune entered at the end of March. Saturn will be there through September 1st. Neptune will be there through October 22nd. But they're both dancing and together. They're both following each other. Saturn is following Neptune. And both of them are going to return to the sign of Aries and cross the world point, which is 0 degrees of the cardinal fire sign of Aries, impacting all of us, bringing major world events, and the two will convene on February 20th of next year. This is an opportunity for all of us to co-create together on the collective what that dream we want to structure represents. Obviously, again, we've been dealing with a lot of loss, depression, alienation, and what's happening? We're in Gemini season. That's a time for circulating. That's a time for learning and socializing and hanging out with your neighbors or going to local events where you may run into your neighbors. And you may not want to see your neighbors, but my point is getting social. We need to, interact with other people, supporting local businesses, local activities, taking trips, doing things to stimulate your mind, workshops, taking seminars, whatever it is to stimulate your mind and get engaged. And Uranus, as I said, will be in Gemini from July 7th through November 6th, and then it returns at the end of April of next year, and it'll be there for another 7 years from that time. And so on and off. And this is going to bring the magic of and potential of Pluto and Aquarius that we haven't yet tapped into. And I know this year has been very chaotic, and I know with Saturn at the last degree of Pisces, you can feel like there's no way out. But Saturn is at a tipping point. It's about to complete a cycle, and there are 12 signs, and there are 30 degrees to a sign. Now it's entering a new sign, the world point, which impacts all of us, 0 degrees of the cardinal signs, Aries, Cancer, Libra, and Capricorn. And this initiates a new beginning. Saturn may be in its fall position, meaning that it's exalted in the opposite sign, which is the sign of Libra. Saturn is how you structure, how you build, how you mature. The sign of Aries is ruled by the planet Mars, and Mars and Saturn in traditional astrology are viewed as the malefics, but Saturn is anchoring and Mars is taking charge, taking a stand. And Saturn in Aries is about taking a stand. It is about taking risks because Aries is the pioneer of the zodiac, and it is ruled by Mars, which has a fight in him or her or them. This is about fighting for what you believe in, having confidence in a very tentative world, which we're all dealing with. This is something that each one of us is grappling with, but also realizing that that's a reason to let it to impel you to go forward with what you love. And now that we're in Gemini season, and where I am in the northern hemisphere, this is, pretty soon we'll have the summer solstice not far ahead. That'll be on June 20th this year. And in the southern hemisphere, it'll be the beginning of the winter solstice. But, this is a time, again, where we're having warmer weather. We're finally, at least where I am, I'm sorry, if the other places, well, we'll get the colder weather eventually too. But this is a time where all of the personal planets for all of us, wherever we are, whatever hemisphere we're in, they are out of their shadow, because Mars retrograded at the end of last year. It stationed direct at the end of February. It only cleared its shadow on May 2nd. Venus retrograded on March 1st. It only cleared its shadow on May 15th, May 16th. And all of the personal planets are now direct. Pluto is retrograde, but that's an outer planet, and they're retrograde for about 40% of the year. So we have a lot of energy around Aries now. We're in Gemini season, which is, again, communicating, socializing, marketing, sales, getting engaged in local events and travel and trips and, taking trips. And with Saturn and Neptune in Aries, this is about structuring a new beginning. Aries is the first sign of the zodiac. And then you've got Chiron and Eris, the goddess of discord. They're meeting up exactly on May 26th. And that is about facing your vulnerability and your wounds in order to fight for what you believe in and, again, to take a stand. And Saturn in Aries can also challenge your self-confidence, but this is about being a leader. Each of us has to have command within ourselves to, whether we're vulnerable or not. Chiron is about your vulnerabilities and facing that and allowing that to empower you, because each of us has them, obviously, and we're human, and it reminds you that we are all human, and there is very much a vulnerability around your identity. And we're in a world where many identities are getting morphed, where people seem almost very similar, and yet maybe all of this focus in Aries is reminding us that as much as we're morphing with technology and we're socializing less as a society. I read a study that like in the early 90s, people socialized quite considerably more locally and with their neighbors and people that they knew, even acquaintances, far more than they do now. Whether it's reasons of work or money or whatever the reasons are, I think a lot of it has to do with technology and social media. And we're definitely in a digital revolution. This energy is, Pluto in Aquarius is revolutionizing the energy, but I also think it's going to remind us that if we're healing and we're having to be wounded healers, Chiron and Aries, facing our own vulnerabilities and having confidence to charge ahead, believing in ourselves. That's very much Saturn and Aries, Chiron and Eris meeting up in Aries. If that's the deal, we have to come together as well, not just remotely, but come together to build those social skills, to build the brain even. It's good for mental activity, to have social activity. And I think Uranus and Gemini is going to provide new outlets and new ways to come together organically and remotely, because regardless of what our emotional and our psychological needs are, we still need to build our businesses, and we have infinite opportunity. And knowing that next year we're going to have Saturn and Neptune building a whole new dream in Aries, but we're also going to have Uranus and Gemini forming a trine to Pluto, which is magical. And Uranus and Pluto will be forming a sextile to Neptune in Aries. So they're both in air signs. Uranus will be in Gemini, which is really expediting the learning process, giving so many new opportunities. I know many think about AI, but even ourselves, learning new ways to develop our critical thinking and our ways to ascend in this new time and to think in new ways and to think in positive ways. And then Pluto in Aquarius is also bringing things to a whole other vibration. So you've got those two planets in ingenious signs in harmony. Neptune in Aries bringing a whole new dream. It has not been in Aries since 1861. And again, bringing a spirituality as we fight. So it doesn't mean that you can't be kind and compassionate, but also be strong and fierce in what you need to take a stand for and what you need to build. Saturn in Pisces has no boundaries. So even though it's not in its fall position or its detriment, it really is not an easy sign to navigate as far as I'm concerned. I almost think I prefer Saturn in Aries. I think with Saturn in the first house, I usually find that to be a very constructive transit. And Aries is the first sign. The first house of your chart is the Aries house. Doesn't mean you have Aries on that cusp, but it'll have themes around self and identity. And if you have a major planet transiting there, it's bringing major beginnings with the flavor of whatever planet is transiting there. And so with that said, Saturn in Aries helps us to build this new beginning. And this week, we've got some magic ahead. Again, we've got the Sun in Gemini. Fun for getting out there and doing social things and learning and being curious. Then we've got tomorrow, Venus, the planet of love and beauty. While Venus was retrograde, it was in Pisces a long time where it's exalted, but it was getting trampled by Saturn. It was being squashed by Saturn for a month in April. And it was meeting up with Neptune, which can be creative, but can also be very misleading and depressing. And meeting up with the North Node, which can also drain it. Well, now it's forming a beautiful angle to Mars at 3:42 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time tomorrow. And that is a beautiful energy that permeates for the rest of the month of May into early June. And that is creative and fun and social. Very nice for at least the United States. It's a holiday weekend, so nice energy for that. And then the Sun forms a sextile to Neptune. The Sun in Gemini is forming a beautiful aspect. That's when they're 60 degrees apart to Neptune, which is the dream. And that occurs at 8:40 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time, bringing some positive energy, bringing some creativity to the weekend. And this weekend is going to be huge, and I'm going to do another video, but there's just a lot going on. There's a fun, busy energy in a good way that probably a lot of you feel. A lot of people I'm noticing are kind of in holiday mode already, you know. And so we're going to have Mercury, we're going to have Mercury meet up with Uranus on Saturday the 24th at 7:15 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. Now recognize that the Sun does not meet up with Uranus in Gemini this year. Neither will Mercury, because we've got Uranus entering Gemini after Gemini season. We did have the Sun-Uranus explosion last Saturday on the 17th, and that was, you know, again, the Brooklyn Bridge story, a lot of crazy stories that were happening at that point. And so, but we have Mercury-Uranus in Taurus, and that occurs at 7:15 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time on May 24th. That's the day that Saturn will enter Aries. There could be shocks and surprises. There could be some big news that gets uncovered because, again, you know, Uranus is the planet of surprise. It is an ingenious planet, but it can bring chaos. There could be changes, perhaps, or just things get uncovered. On that date, earlier in the day, the Sun forms a beautiful trine to Pluto at 11:55 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time. So that brings stability to the energy, and that is a transformative energy, so that's helpful. But the Mercury-Uranus could also be very vivacious energy. Maybe somebody shows up at the event or the party that you didn't expect and brings some fun, or who knows, you know. And then the big kicker is that Saturn enters Aries at 11:36 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, and it will remain in Aries through September 1st. Then it goes back to where it is now, which is the last degree of Pisces. That's a difficult placement where many people deal with depression and, you know, mental health issues, addiction. 29 degrees of Pisces is not an easy degree. But, you know, that's what we're all working with right now. So for people that are struggling with mental health issues, really check in with them or check in with yourself. But we've got that shift occurring this weekend with that beautiful Venus-Mars trine, Sun in harmony with Neptune, building up to a new moon in Gemini, which perfects on Monday, May 26th, which is Memorial Day here. And I will do another video on Friday to delve into the new moon, which is very promising. But that Saturn in Aries is a big deal. And even though it's in its fall position, I think it gives us structure as opposed to Saturn and Pluto. It's being informed by Neptune in Aries, and Neptune is the modern ruler of Pisces. And Neptune is bringing a dream and a vision to this whole new theme, which did not happen in the mid-late 90s. Neptune was not in Aries at that time. Chiron and Eris were not there too, saying, okay, things are very fiery. There's a lot of fiery energy, you know, and we're getting, you know, The water is leaving. Saturn is leaving Pisces. Neptune leaves Pisces. The North Node is in Pisces, but that's it. After all of this, we're not going to have major outer. We're going to have very Aries influence, actually. So that's the deal. And then Mercury, which rules the sign of Gemini, the planet of learning, the planet of the mind, knowledge, information, transportation. Mercury ingresses into the sign of Gemini on May 25th at 8:59 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, and will be there through June 8th. So the Sun and Mercury are both giving us a preview of Uranus and Gemini. It'll be there a few months this year, again from July 7th through November 6th, then it returns on April 25th of next year, and it'll be there on and off through 2033, bringing a lot of innovation, a lot of brilliance, a lot of new possibilities. I think that's exciting. I think it'll prefer being in Gemini than in Aries, but I think it's going to be rapid thinking. I think it's going to bring a lot of new advances in technology, but also I think with the education system there needs to be a reboot, and I think that will happen. And I think for people to connect in the real world again, as much as we're talking about things like AI, Gemini to me is local learning. It's not remote learning. That's more Pluto and Aquarius. That's the outer planets in Aquarius in the late 90s, or in the 90s. This is about also connecting in the real world. And I think that hybrid is necessary, and that'll be much more of a focus. I think that's also being informed by Saturn and Neptune in Pisces, which has not finished completely. At the end, this fall through the early part of next year, they're going to return to the last decan of Pisces, the last 5 degrees. Neptune will only be at 29 degrees, which is a fixed star known as Shiat, a very difficult placement. And Saturn will go back to 25 degrees of Pisces, close to where the North Node of Karma is currently transiting. And that is about healing, and that is about dealing with mental health issues. And again, being alienated is the worst thing for that. So there is a lot of magic. There's some twists and turns with Mercury and Uranus meeting up on Saturday. We have a big deal with Saturn entering Aries on Saturday. Many of you will be socializing and having fun, or maybe decompressing, but realizing this summer is a time for focusing on the new dream that you're going to be working with on and off through 2033. Having the courage, the confidence to take a stand for what you want to build in your life and what you want to heal personally and collectively. And having, again, some excitement and new things to deal with, which I think is exciting. And Jupiter's going to enter Cancer in the beginning of June, on June 9th, and that's also going to bring a very exalted, abundant energy. But let's focus more on this theme right now. I'll be back to talk about the new moon on Friday. The new moon's on Monday, but I'll be back on Friday. And take care. Thanks.